They shall never grow old, because our memories will never die. Hey guys, this is a very special review for me. I remember seeing the trailer for They Shall Not Grow Old about sometime near the late end of 2018 and just being marveled by the technology that this film was boasting. Taking footage that is over 100 years old, bringing back contrast, adding color, audio, and 3D effect to it just looked incredible. Admittedly, though, it was very hard to try and see this movie. At first, it was being shown at the Rio for like a day, and I, of course, was away for that. And then they were doing very limited showings of it at Cineplex. And then all of a sudden, I just noticed that it seemed to be in regular circulation. So I don't know how long this will last, but if you have a chance to see it, I don't know if it's just for Canadians, but if you have the opportunity to go and see this, go and watch this movie, and especially go and see it in 3D. They Shall Not Grow Old is basically a passion project by Peter Jackson. He was approached by BBC war memorial groups and whatnot and asked him if he wanted to do a World War I documentary. And he said, well, that's really cool, but that's very broad. It's coming up on 100 years since the end of the war, so what could he have done that would be different? At first, he had a thought of, well, what would happen if we kind of revitalized the footage? So they took this 3-minute clip and they basically did what the end result of the film is. They added color, they added contrast, they added details that were kind of missing from the old footage. They slowed it down to make it look like regular stock footage, and then they made it in 3D, and it was incredible. So they then decided to make it as a whole full feature-length movie. And admittedly, the film doesn't give you that effect right off the bat. It's giving you the old World War footage. Admittedly, though, it's definitely been touched up because you don't see scratches, you don't see jaggedness. Like the motion control for the original footage, like the black and white footage that they show you at first, is incredible. And then there's a few times where you think that the effect is going to happen, but it doesn't. But when it does, there was not a lot of people in the movie theater, admittedly, when I went and saw this, because I saw this at 10 o'clock at night. But as far as I could tell, when it switched over to color, everyone in the theater went, whoa. It was an amazing experience just to see this world that we've always seen in just very, like, obviously black and white and sometimes very dark or very bright kind of overlay. It was such vivid color and all of the audio. This must have been a Foley artist's dream / nightmare, because there's all this audio that is added. They brought in lip syncers, so they could read the lips of people, and then depend on their uniform and just the regiment, that would determine where they were from in terms of England, because this is pretty much focused entirely on British soldiers. And by knowing where their regiment is, they're able to figure out which region of England they're from, and then that determines their accent. And it was so amazing. And the reason why you're able to figure this all out is because once the movie ends, there is a 30-minute documentary, a 30-minute little mini doc at the end after the credits, where Peter just talks about the entire process. And to be honest, I almost wish this was before, because he gives a little bit of an intro kind of off the cuff talking about the project. But when you watch the ending, like this little mini doc, you appreciate all of the work so much more. This documentary does not have a direction at all. It is literally just different pieces of interviews from actual soldiers who served during the war, and they have for instance, they just have different little tidbits, and they're all from interviews. Apparently they had 600 hours of interviews that they went through, and they condensed it all into just the basic experience of a soldier on the trenches. And they have some pretty amazing little stories and little tidbits that I didn't even know. And I fashioned myself as a big person of history, especially with the First and the Second World War. But there's little things that they talk about, how they would heat up the guns. They would fire the Lewis guns, and then they would take the hot barrel and fill it with water so they could boil tea. They talked about the absolute extent of trench foot, and at one point they talk about how the trenches were filled with water, and there's this wide pan shot that just shows how the fields of the war were just giant minefield potholes. And it's just amazing the experience that these guys went through. And because there is that lack of direction, that might be a little bit off jarring. It was a little bit for me because I was kind of waiting for the point, but it's a very personal story. It's a different type of documentary. It's not so more like Ken Burns's. This is just a very in the situation, and we just live it through the war. Because admittedly, the film starts with the draft. Well, not the draft. Sorry, the volunteers, and then it does a little bit of trench warfare, and then it talks about tanks. And tanks didn't enter the war until the latter half of 1917. So it does not really have a direction. It doesn't talk about a single place. It doesn't talk about a single battle. It just talks about the experiences that these soldiers went through. And then when the film is coming to a close, when they return from the war, it all comes back to black and white. In terms of a documentary for wanting to rewatch because of the content that you learn about, it's more so little tidbit facts here and there. So for a directional sort of documentary where you can like, oh yeah, remember this part, you're not going to say that about the story. You're going to say that about the technology, about how well the footage is restored. And again, about that little mini doc at the end. And Peter just, you could tell that he really cared about this. He immensely cared. His grandfather served in the war. He had all of these magazines that were released during the First World War just so happened to be in his house. He even had some uniforms that he kept. Oh, at one point we were making the joke that we probably had some artillery cannons in the backyard. He borrowed them, but it was still, he made a joke that we thought that he might have actually had them. This is an incredible film to watch in terms of its technology. Almost, I hate to make the reference, but kind of like Avatar in terms of you have to see it to fully appreciate what this is, and you have to see it in 3D, because if you watch it on film, it will be okay. Like once the colorization comes in, yeah, but the 3D is done even for the black and white. So it's incredible to view. And if you have the chance to go and see this movie, I would highly suggest it. So I'm not going to give a review for this because this is a documentary, but I'm just saying that you should see this. If you figure you have an interest in any sort of war history, if you are a interest in World War I, for anyone who's a Battlefield 1 player for sure, and just a vivid appreciation of people working painstakingly to bring back old footage and restore it, I would definitely suggest you watch this. This was an incredible movie to view. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, and if you're interested in more, maybe subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.